Greetings to all the participants present here. This is Neha from Quvae Research and Publications. So to start with, let me give you a brief about our services. So Quvae serves as a platform to publish research articles in prominent journals and conference proceedings. We assist authors in publishing their research findings in high impact factor journals, promoting their work, enhancing their reputation, and building a strong scientific profile. So among several indexing databases, Scopus is one of the most preferred for publishing articles. The wide recognition and impact of these journals makes them highly valued in their academic careers. We have recently collaborated with a Scopus Q1 journal, which is F1000 Research, published by Taylor and Francis. It is an open access research publishing platform for scientists, scholars, and clinicians that offers rapid publication of articles and other research outputs without editorial bias. The authors can now easily submit their articles through our partnered gateway with F1000. All articles benefit from transparent peer review and editorial guidance on making all source data openly available. So this is our gateway page of F1000 Research. Now I'd like to welcome our speaker, Dr. FROILAN D. MOBO, who is a graduate of Doctor in Public Administration from the Urdaneta City University and a graduate of second doctorate degree in Development Education at the Central Luzon State University. After obtaining his doctorate degree, he was promoted and designated to the position of Assistant Director and Associate Professor of the Department of Research, Development, and Extension in the Philippine Merchant Marine Academy. He also worked with different international research institutions such as Regional Director and Ph.D. Lecturer in Cell Academic, Malaysia. He was also appointed as the Editor-in-Chief of the International Journal of Multidisciplinary Applied Business and Education Research, Malang, Indonesia. He also published 12 international books in Europe, Indonesia, and India. Currently, he is working as a technical research evaluator by the Department of Science and Technology and has published 74 research articles with 48 citations in ResearchGate and 36 citations in Google Scholar. He is an external peer reviewer in various international research journals and has been invited as a keynote speaker at various international conferences abroad and at international universities around the globe. Once again, I'd like to welcome you, Doctor.
It's visible on the screen. So I was tasked for today's discussion about writing and publish research articles in high impact journals. So before we start, so it's very important for nowadays to know the part of writing a research article, especially on the academic community, which is greatly values research articles. So in addition, they publish articles which contribute significantly for career advancement, particularly for example, for professorial level that who wants to achieve their level or status. So the publication research articles can be published in a high scholarly journal, which is peer-reviewed publications worldwide. It has become one of the major requirements for research, of course, pursuing a PhD or even for a professorial level, which I mentioned a while ago. So in addition, of course, a large number of professors and students who wants to apply, of course, they might be able to find this as part of their relevant requirement. And then part of this, of course, the research paper topic must be original and supported by possible reasoning, and then perform possible studies and be sure to understand the tools in your field or other fields used. For example, if that is more on the multidisciplinary area, it can be written in different subjects or topics, and there should be a strong literature review that cannot be replaced before going to a new endeavor of studies. And of course, plan out your experimental design thoroughly. So in general, it should be spent on doing your study, then caring about the preferable topics. So, however, there are few exceptions when doing this. But when you do a careful part of your study, doing this when you write your research, it should be part of your specialization. And another, be careful when selecting your resources when creating your experiment. And then, of course, there should be literature that can strongly support your study. And then, of course, it's very important to consult a professional who is expert on this area when choosing a particular topic. And then you must understand the topic you want to research. And then, of course, before you begin your task, it is be able to clearly establish or spend time doing this topic. Then frequently, of course, do a process of literature review, and then know your experimental endpoints and main focus. And then part of that, it is very important to consider when you want to publish your research, of course, in a high impact journal, which is one of our achievement. And it's very important to gather information, of course, on those uh, area that you want to choose. So it is also very important to read and adhere to every one of journal's instruction for every article, and then make sure that you have a strong hypothesis that can support and state it properly. And you have to write many efforts as part of your significant and valuable. And then, of course, it's very important to get your paper reviewed by external reviewer outside, and then ensure that your paper reads smoothly. And then it is important that your paper must be concise, clear, and grammatically sound. And always try to set up a review, of course, in a native universal language. And it is very important that you have to check it carefully. So the instruction, of course, part of this is you have to follow certain guidelines which is being set by international journals. For example, in a high impact journal, so you should follow by downloading their templates, other references that is really important, especially when you submit your paper, for example, in a Thomson Reuters journal or index in a Scopus. It's very important to follow all aspects, which is very important. That is to avoid, of course, from getting rid of course, number one, it's very important that your paper must be accepted. Okay, and then part of that, it is very important on how we choose a journal on a high impact journal. So part of that, we should to check first the number of the impact factor on the part of the journal. So figure that we can choose it's at least 10 or greater. But in the most fields, the impact factor of 10 is considered as an excellent score, while 3 is a flag as good and an average of score is less than 1 when we check the impact factor of a particular journal. So it's very important to check every aspects when we select journals before we submit. And of course, part of that, always be careful. Okay. And of course, it's very important to know what is the importance of a high impact journal. So in most academic publishing, aiming a high means selecting a journal which is best possible for the impact factor. So this is this in a publishing sense, and it is part of measuring, of course, the readership number of other researchers while your article is being read and being cited. So journals with wider circulations therefore have been more impact factors. So those that have been just been launched by few researchers internationally will have a lower impact factors. But if the journal has been there for almost 2 years or 3 years, therefore it can be categorized as one of the part of the high impact journal. So you can check them in other areas based on that. and you can identify them based on their ranking. And of course, it is very important to identify first, and of course to avoid predatory publisher, because sometimes there are also some predatory journals that they will just key in that their journal has an impact factor. So it is very important to check, of course, the high index, the citation analysis. So that is one of the important factors, that if you will check the following, you will be able to know if the high index is coming from databases such as the Web of Science, the Scopus, and the Google Scholar. And of course, sometimes citation analysis can be considered as part of the work which is being cited. Majority, for example, under the databases of Web of Science and Scopus, and even in Google Scholar, basically. And it is very important that we have to check the citation analysis tab on the following journal which is being indexed on those area. And of course, there are also other tools which can be used for determining the impact factor of the journal, because majority of that, sometimes we would be able to check that based on the citation analysis. For example, if the journal is indexed in Google Scholar, or in other, for example, in Scopus journal. And of course, it's very important that when you write your paper, it's very important, of course, that your article is one of the first indicators that the readers will able to get your research and concept. And of course, it should be concise, accurate, and more informative. And you must include, of course, the relevant keywords in your title. That is, of course, to avoid also abbreviations and other factors that can be rejected during the submission. So it is very important to follow the template of the journal. And part of it, of course, it's very important to have the essential part of the paper, which is the keywords, which can produce, of course, a writing thought. And when writing a journal article, you must select keywords that would you like to uh, that rank for, and it has a potential uses that discovers your article when conducting research using other search engines. And of course, part of that is very important to have a pivotal part of the article, which is the writing process. So, of course, that is introduction, not only to introduce your topic, but your stance on how you would be able to contextualize your argument in the broader academic field. For example, if there is a research gap on your paper. And of course, uh, for the methodology, it's very important to check every part, every subsections, if there is an important area. So you have to complete all the data. For example, the subsections, which is very important before you submit your paper in a high impact journal. And of course, it's very important to check also the results and discussion that may combine into a single section or presented separately. Because it's very important also to include, of course, the figures and the table number. And of course, part of that is very important to state clearly the conclusions. And of course, you should have an explanation of the importance and relevance. And also the summary of illustrations may be also be included. And of course, the references and citations should be well balanced, current, and relevant. Although in every field, there's a big difference. So you have to focus on the aim and cite references that are not more than 10 years old if possible. So part of that, of course, the studies might be cited be strongly related to your question. So it is strongly advised that it should be related on your part. Okay. And of course, when we compare the APA format, for example, if you're be using APA 6 or 7 in terms of comparison, of course, many students have used APA 6 in their previous education programs, but part of that, there's a big difference in terms of tables and other discussions, because part of that in transitioning APA 7, take note that there are these are not comprehensive tables that will be able to have an effect and also in the referencing style. And according to APA, the American Psychological Association formally replaced the sixth edition to the publication manual of the American Psychological Association was published in 2009, which is the seventh version. And then part of the key changes of the class, of course, we have the following. We have, of course, the website names, the publication locations, the publishers, the retrieve, sometimes the DOI, the spelling. So it is very important, of course, to check the APA format when we use that. And of course, the citations which give the readers the opportunity to see where you get your information. This is to critique, of course, your study on the sources you have used and to learn more about earlier research on the topic of your study. Of course, that is to of course to justify your study against, of course, plagiarism accusation if there are some issues regarding this. So it's very important, of course, to clearly cite which is really relevant to your study. And when writing a research paper, it is important that you draw on data information from the range of sources, of course, with your arguments that can inspire new ones. And you could use sources like, of course, book, articles, and other literature. And it's, of course, it is crucial to reference these sources of information when you write your paper. And of course, it is very important to acknowledge, of course, the author, which can enable your readers to recognize and locate the sources, which is can learn more about the subjects that you are handling. And part of that, of course, when writing a research article, the process of moving from one idea to a published manuscript can be a daunting one. Here we break the process into a series of steps which can design and make this essential task more manageable. Of course, we have to determine the authors when designing a research paper. It's very important that we recommend, of course, an initial list and other authors. Sometimes we can also do a literature review first, such as a list of authors should be based on established guidelines and should make explicit estimated contribution of each individual to the topic. And of course, part of that, when we start writing on the study, it is very important that we have to evoke new ideas that you may realize that there are additional requirements to run or additional controls that you need to add. So if you wait in your if you are done with your study, it is very important to move to another areas where you can improve your topic, and then decide it is the best time to publish your article. And then of course you can check part by part, which will make significant contribution to the scientific literature. And then you should, of course, determine the format of your paper. Sometimes in a published papers, we can determine if we can use a full-length research article or a short or brief communications, because in the publication industry right now, we can submit a full paper into an IMRAD form. Sometimes we can submit a brief or communication style in a matter of 3,500 words or less, which will contain information, for example, tables, figures. Unlike full papers, sometimes we need to have a content of the methodology, the results, and discussions. And of course, it is very important to select the journal. There are several factors to consider when choosing a journal, and it is unlikely that one journal will have all the features that you're looking for, but you have to consider the essential feature that you did not compromise. For example, you have to consider that the manuscript must be uh, done in a peer review process if they are to be considered for research articles. And of course, you have to check every aspect, for example, in terms of indexing. Of course, that is very important. Then another, of course, the language, because English has become the dominant form for international scientific communication. Thus, if you're interested in part of a submission for the international community, it is better to use this standard form. And then, of course, the focus of your study, of course, what type of research does the journal publish? So it is very important to check, of course, the scope of the journal and which disciplines are represented. That is to avoid getting rejected from the journal. So it's very important to focus part of that because a lot of researchers right now, even authors, they experience rejections from journal because sometimes it's out of scope. So it's very important to check first the scope of the journal and of course the your field of specialization. And other part of that, of course, it's very important to check, of course, other databases. For example, we can use Google Scholar in checking, of course, uh, references that focus on academic research, and it is a good alternative to do, of course, keywording, literature review, and it focuses more on the scholarly journals and publications, which are often not included in other standard web searches. But unlike in Google search, which searches the web in general, but it isn't designed to have a scholarly database because when we use an indexing or a database, scholarly database, we can see that there are a lot of published articles that can be used for referencing. And because part of the Google Scholar, you would be able to get, of course, other referencing style, other citation matrix, which is very important, and we would be able to know if uh, the paper is published in a peer-reviewed journal. And why it is better than Google Scholar, Google search? Because it returns results from the academic journals and other scholarly publications. So this means that the results are more credible and reliable than those regular search engines like Google. So when you use other research databases, for example, in Google Scholar, you would be able to determine, first, the frequency, the citations that counts on the published articles, and of course, the high impact of the journal, not only the journal, but on, of course, on the author side. And how does Google Scholar works? So when you use Google Scholar to search of information, you will be able to see different types of sources. For example, books in other peer-reviewed journals. You will also find publication from scientific societies and government agencies. And also, the referencing study, you would be able to use it and cite it. Because Google Scholar uses a ranking system which is called the Scholar Rank. Of course, that helps determine which results are more relevant than others by looking at how often they are cited in the scholarly literature. So that means that when you find something interesting in your search results, it might be a use. You would be able to know that someone was able to cite that paper. In an increasingly popular article databases, of course, you would be able to do a lot of literature review by using the scholarly resources, which is, of course, available. And, of course, part of that, of course, it depends on your field. For example, if that is it focuses on economics, psychology, or other areas, it is very important that you would be able to check, of course, the scope of your paper and, of course, your discipline. And of course, don't ever pay for an article when you click on the links. Of course, it's very important to check, of course, other areas and use the cited by feature if you get one great hit on the Google Scholar. So you would be able to check the number of citations on a particular published article. So when you check the properties or of the paper, you would be able to check that it was cited how many times, and you would be able to see the impact factor of the article and other areas. And so a citation generator is also important because it's an online free service that helps users to automatically create bibliographic citations. Sometimes it can also help uh, library catalogs and other databases that can offer one click that can create an auto citation that can be easily be searched. So part of that, for example, in the Google Citation Generator, you would be able to see that you could easily cite your paper. For example, if the referencing style is APA or other referencing style, you would be able to see and check. And of course, we have a lot of citation generator. For example, website is for me and other things that we can use. We can create, of course, other referencing style. For example, we have the Harvard, APR, or MLA citations, and we also have the script as part of a auto citation tool, which we can easily use as part of the auto citation referencing. And part of that is it is also important to use grammar checker, which is I know that this is one of the advanced tool that we are using right now when we write our papers scholarly. And of course, citations, there are two main points to pay attention to. Of course, the consistency and accuracy when you go through your manuscript. You have to check or edit and proofread it and look closely at the citations when the text, for example, if the journal prefers the following, because your citation must also be accurate and complete if they match your referencing list, because sometimes even the journal checks the citation analysis and of course on how you have done it according to your referencing style. And part of that is it is also very important to check the similarity report. So when we interpret the similarity report of a particular paper, we have to scan submissions, of course, for plagiarism. For example, commonly we use Turnitin or other software that can check similar papers being submitted online. And there are some instances that you would be able to know if there are some if there are papers which is being published or submitted because of the sources, then you would be able to flag, or that because sometimes the database includes billions of web pages that can archive content from the internet. Sometimes a repository of works from students or even researchers that they have submitted that into a Turnitin, and then they can easily be reflected on the databases. For example, which comprises a lot of submissions coming from journals and other publication stages. And of course, it's very important that you have to check the similarity report because it is perfect natural for a report to match against some of our databases. For example, if you have used codes and references correctly, there will be an instances that there will be find a match that is totally okay. and you can also exclude them if there's a need to exclude them. And then you have to check, of course, the sources, if that is coming from an internet or coming from a repository. So it is very important to determine if the paper is not acceptable or not acceptable before you submit that to a journal. Because similar reports provide a summary of matching or highly similar text that can be found in a submitted paper. For example, we have the following. So when a similarity report is available for viewing, you would be able to check the percentage if it's available. So it's very important to check that. You can do a self checking before you submit that to a particular journal, and you would be able to see you can write it and revise it properly. And of course, the color of the report icon indicates that the similarity score of the paper can be based of matching or similar text that was uncovered. So the percentage range is sometimes 0 to 100%. So the possible similarity ranges are, of course, the following. So these are the following criteria that we can be considered. But majority of the journal right now, for example, in the case of other European journals, they preferred to have a similarity index of 20%, less than 20%. Others, they prefer to have a less than 10% for a high impact journal. So it depends on the ranges. So that's why it's very important that before you submit your paper, you should check the similarity report of your paper. That is to avoid, of course, to be rejected upon submission, because other journals sometimes, during upon your submission, they will be doing an initial check, and if they find out that the paper has a match, they will require you to revise it. Others, sometimes they will reject it. Okay, so those are situations that might be encountered or experienced by an author. So it's very important to check the similarity of your paper and the structure of your paper. And of course, the original report works. The acceptable percentage of similarity works sometimes that is below 20%. But just like what I mentioned, it depends on the journal on how do they set. For example, in other Scopus indexing journals, sometimes they accept less than 10%. In a DOAJ index journal, sometimes they accept less than 20%. Others, they accept less than 30%. But part of that, it's very important that you have to submit your paper, of course, in a well-structured and a well-mannered form. Because, of course, if the paper is reflected more on the side of a 75%, let's say that it indicates a score of 75% or 100%, it can be indicated that your paper needs to be revised, or sometimes it can be considered that your paper is plagiarized. So if those report is being reflected, that's the time that it can be rejected. Okay. So the safest part is if you're going to check if the paper will reflect between sometimes less than 20% or less than 10% prior on the submission of your paper. Because in other high impact factor journal, the acceptable index is, of course, the uh, category there can be reflected as a green. Okay, so it depends on the requirement, and of course, it depends on how you would be able to reduce it. So, of course, it depends on the standard measurement or similarity index of a particular journal. So, what is a good similarity score? Sometimes there is no such thing as a good similarity score, because sometimes Normally, a percentage ranging from 0 to 5 is considered acceptable by many institutions. So it's important to note that a low percentage may indicate that there are no sufficient sources on the databases. And plagiarism may be presented, but it cannot be detected. So, of course, a lot of scholars and authors will be able to quickly assess the authenticity of the paper. Even the publishing journal would be able to check because of the databases and highlight. It can highlight potential plagiarisms that is linked to external sources and, of course, internal sources. And of course, from plagiarism prevention, so when reviewing submitted publications, journal is supposed to look for instances of overlapping and identical material. So, uh, for example, in our journal, I'd just like to share that before we do the peer review process, we have to check first the similarity report, because sometimes there are cases that they do multiple submission and that is not really good, because a similarity report is produced and can demonstrate the degree of resemblance between the submitted article and the published content. So the publisher's editorial policy will be able to require, of course, the content that overlaps the paper which is being submitted. For example, for a paper to be taken into consideration, for example, for publishing, there must be at least be a 20% overall similarity to be considered for publications. And of course, there are some areas that we need to consider, and but it depends on the requirement of a particular high impact factor journal. Of course, with a lower similarity, it can easily be accepted if the paper it has a well structured form. Uh, and of course, part of that, in terms of high tech similarity, some manuscripts would share a low overall similarity. And part of that, the similarity of 20% above is too much because it illustrates how your paper is being copied and not original. So, however, it is very important to follow processes based on the citation guidance, and it's very important to follow the guidance of your institutions or the requirement of the journal. So 20% and higher similarities excessive because it shows than 5% of your paper. And it's very important to check it first. That's why on the part of the requirement of the journal, you should check, of course, the scope, the publication guidelines, and of course, the format of the paper before it will be considered part of the of course, the uh, process of publication, the publication process. So part of that, when we submit papers, so it is very important that we have to check the scope. For example, if the paper is into a multidisciplinary area, it is important that we have to check first the content of the paper and if it matches the scope of the journal. That in that case, we would be able to avoid of getting rejected for upon submission. For example, if you're going to submit your paper in a Scopus index journal, it's better to check first the requirement because and of course you have to check the indexing. It is very important, of course, to check the indexing of the journal. So we have to check if uh, if the journal still exists in the indexing database, because even it is indexed in a Scopus database, sometimes there are also cases that uh, reputable journal which can also be delisted from a Scopus database. It's very important if we have to check if the journal which is indexed in a Scopus is discontinued or still active. In that way, we would be able to avoid that that journal is not predatory. Okay, so we have to check the guidelines, other factors that we considered to be considered as a high impact journal, and of course, to get rid of predatory journal. There are areas that we need to check, of course, the citation guidelines, of course, the editorial board. It's very important because sometimes there are predatory publishers and journals that sometimes they tend to copy and the editorial boards coming from other sources, and then they tend to uh, create a fake journal that they will lure other authors that they might accept submissions. So it is very important to check other factors, and another is it is also considered that the more that the uh, peer review process is longer and the publication process is longer, it is more reputable rather than considering how the fast publication process that is considered predatory. So it's very important to check everything, all aspects. Yeah, you should check, of course, the list, the impact factor, if those things are really true, because other journals sometimes they will just indicate that their journal is a high impact journal, a high impact, it has a high impact factor. But if you're going to check that on the database, for example, in the play review, sometimes it is not true. So it is better to cross check first before before you will end up of getting your paper being submitted in a predatory journal. And of course, part of that, for example, if you have submitted your article in a predatory, the question on that part, can we still withdraw that? Of course, you can still withdraw that. And part of that, it's either the predatory journal will respond or they will not respond. It is important that you have submitted a withdrawal letter on your side. And always be careful on that particular area. Okay. And then, of course, not only journals and of course publisher, but also in terms of conferences, uh, of course, conferences, there are also predatory conferences that uh, sometimes we are receiving conferences coming from unidentified sources. So be careful. Be careful on that. And before I end up my presentation, uh, I'd like to invite all scholars or researchers that would like to participate in our upcoming international conference, which will be done, of course, by Zoom, and it will be held, of course, this coming December 9 to 11. Of course, here in the Philippines, it will be sponsored by the ICSAD Institute Turkey, and it is already endorsed by the Higher Education Office in the Philippines. So the submission of abstract is still ongoing. The deadline is until November 20. So if you want to submit your paper, if you want to present, you can submit it on or before November 21, and you can submit that based on the following requirement. So it's very important to submit that on the email which is indicated on your screen. So I think that would be all for tonight on the part of writing research in high impact factor. So if there are questions regarding submissions and writing guidance, you can ask now. So that would be all for today. So thank you, and once again, good evening and mabuhay from of course from the Philippines. Of course, on that part, it is very important to categorize your publication. For example, if that is categorized as a Scopus index, so you have a big factor in terms of being ranked as a professorial, or sometimes in terms of the credibility on how you work as a researcher. Okay, so those are the benefits if you have published your papers in a well-known reputable journal, for example, in an index of DOAJ, or Scopus, or ISI, or sometimes in EBSCO. So it's very important to determine, of course, the reputability of the journal and its impact factor. So it plays a major role in identifying those part, and identifying or categorizing publication as a major part of being a researcher or a scholar. Any more questions? You can just key in. Any more questions? So if you have problems with your connectivity, just you can key in your uh, questions, just like other researchers.
So, thank you, Doctor. That was indeed a thought-provoking talk on the concepts. Thank you for imparting your knowledge and remarks on writing and publishing research articles in high-impact factor journals. Your examples were fascinating, and the slides you showed gave us a clear understanding that we couldn't have gained in any other way. On behalf of Quvae Research and Publication, I extend our gratitude for sharing your time and thoughts with us. Thank you once again, Doctor. Participants will receive your certificate and presentation document within 7 to 10 working days. Thank you.